For decades, Pastor Jamal Bryant has stood before thousands, preaching hope, faith, and resilience. But behind the pulpit, behind the sermons and smiles, something few have ever seen or even imagined was quietly unfolding. A struggle with loneliness so deep that it shook the very foundation of his life. He's confided rarely about nights spent wrestling with isolation, moments when the weight of expectation felt unbearable, and the haunting question, who's really there for me when the congregation leaves? Tonight, we're uncovering the hidden side of a man known for his charisma and strength, the side that reveals vulnerability, heartbreak, and the personal battles that even a celebrated pastor cannot escape. What Jamal Bryant shared in private about his loneliness will shock you, and it might change the way you see faith, leadership, and the human heart forever. At first glance, Pastor Jamal Bryant's life seems like the picture of success: powerful sermons, a thriving ministry, a presence that commands attention wherever he goes. But when most people don't see, what rarely makes headlines is the personal struggle behind the public persona. In this video, we're diving deep into Jamal Bryant's revelations about his loneliness, the private battles that even his closest friends barely knew about, and the moments that shook him to his core. You won't believe the nights he spent wrestling with isolation, the personal doubts that even sermons couldn't resolve, and the rare confessions that reveal the man behind the ministry. We'll explore how fame, responsibility, and expectation can weigh on even the strongest individuals, and why Jamal's story resonates far beyond the pulpit. This isn't just a story about loneliness, it's about vulnerability, resilience, and the universal human struggle to find connection when life demands perfection. By the end of this video, you'll see Jamal Bryant in a completely new light, a man grappling with loneliness while inspiring thousands, and the lessons we can all learn from his candid truths. This is where it gets unbelievable. When you think of Pastor Jamal Bryant, the first images that come to mind are likely the stage, the pulpit, the crowd, and the energy that fills the room. He commands attention with every word, every gesture, every sermon. To the outside world, it seems effortless, a life of purpose, impact, and influence. But behind that public success lies a hidden reality, a life of private struggle that few people ever glimpse. Even at the height of his ministry, Jamal confided that the loneliness he felt was real, intense, and at times almost unbearable. It's a loneliness that doesn't come from a lack of people around you. On the contrary, he's constantly surrounded by congregants, staff, and supporters. But it's the kind of loneliness that comes from the pressure of responsibility, from being a pillar everyone depends on, from having to maintain an image of strength when your heart feels fragile. Jamal described the feeling of being alone in a room full of people. Even when celebrating achievements, even during powerful sermons, there were moments where he felt invisible, disconnected, and burdened by expectations he couldn't voice publicly. Nights were often the hardest. After the last person left the sanctuary, the applause faded and the doors closed. Silence became overwhelming. In those moments, he faced the weight of his own thoughts, doubts, and fears, the kind of internal struggle that can shake even the strongest leaders. What makes his story so compelling is not just the struggle itself, but the contradiction it represents. To many, he is a symbol of strength, charisma, and leadership, yet privately, he wrestles with a vulnerability that is rarely spoken about in the world of high-profile pastors. It's a reminder that human beings, no matter how powerful or revered, are not immune to loneliness, anxiety, or the need for connection. But what intensified this loneliness was not just the absence of companionship. It was the pressure to be perfect, to never falter, to always inspire, to continually lead without revealing the cracks beneath the surface. Jamal admitted that early in his ministry, he often ignored these feelings, believing that revealing vulnerability would be a sign of weakness. He carried his struggles silently, sometimes for months, until the emotional weight became almost impossible to bear. And then came moments that forced him to confront the truth. personal challenges, relationship strains, and moments of doubt made it clear that ignoring loneliness was no longer sustainable. Jamal realized that he had to face his isolation head-on to seek understanding, support, and strategies to navigate this private battle while still leading publicly. But as we'll see in the next chapter, confronting loneliness wasn't a linear journey. It involved self-reflection, emotional reckoning, and moments that shook him to his core, moments that few would expect from a man whose life seems so full of purpose. Being a prominent pastor comes with privileges, influence, admiration, respect, but it also carries an invisible burden that many people don't see. For Jamal Bryant, the pressure to constantly appear strong, confident, and unwavering became a source of profound isolation. Every decision, every sermon, every public interaction carried the weight of scrutiny, not only from his congregation, but from the media, peers, and the broader community. Jamal often described feeling trapped in a paradox. He had thousands of people looking up to him, yet no one he could fully confide in. While many might assume that pastors have an innate support system, family, church staff, and friends, the reality is far more complicated. Trust becomes a delicate issue. People are drawn to you because of your influence and charisma, but how many are truly there for your emotional well-being? How many offer support without expectation? How many understand the pressure of being always on? He shared that even close relationships were affected. Friends and family, while loving and supportive, often couldn't fully grasp what it meant to live under a constant microscope. Every action, every word, every perceived misstep was magnified. And in a life where missteps can quickly become headlines, Jamal learned early that vulnerability came with risk. There were nights when he would lie awake, surrounded by comfort, yet feeling the weight of solitude pressing down. It wasn't simply being alone that haunted him. It was feeling unseen in a way that mattered. He had to project confidence, decisiveness, and wisdom, even when his own heart was heavy. In interviews, he admitted that these moments of loneliness were often accompanied by self-reflection, questioning not his faith, but his ability to carry the weight of so many expectations without breaking. Workshops, sermons, and community events provided temporary distraction, yet each day also reinforced a lingering emptiness. The constant cycle of giving, guiding, and inspiring left little room for him to process his own emotions. Even when surrounded by people, the experience of loneliness was palpable. It was an emotional exhaustion born from responsibility, a sense that he had to prioritize everyone else's needs over his own, often at the cost of his personal well-being. What made Jamal's struggle especially complex was the tension between faith and human vulnerability. He knew that as a spiritual leader, people expected him to be a pillar of strength, yet internally, he grappled with feelings of inadequacy, doubt, and isolation that challenged that expectation. This duality, the public persona versus the private reality, created a silent battle that few could see or understand. And yet, there were moments of revelation. He realized that confronting his loneliness was not a sign of weakness, but an essential step towards authenticity and resilience. Acknowledging the struggle allowed him to begin searching for strategies to manage isolation, connect more deeply with himself and others, and ultimately reclaim a sense of personal peace. But as we'll see in the next chapter, this journey wasn't far from easy. Jamal's attempts to address his loneliness revealed not just personal challenges, but also unexpected dynamics within his ministry, relationships, and the way the world perceived him. And some of the truths he confronted were shocking and deeply moving, truths that few had ever heard him share publicly. For Pastor Jamal Bryant, the struggle with loneliness was never just an abstract feeling. It was deeply personal, tangible, and often overwhelming. Behind closed doors, away from the applause, the cameras, and the admiration, he faced battles that few could imagine. These were battles that tested not just his faith, but his emotional endurance, his sense of identity, and the very core of who he was. Jamal described moments where the world seemed heavy, even suffocating. Nights after ministry events, when the congregation had left and the echo of his voice faded from the sanctuary, he would often sit in silence. The silence was not peaceful. It was a mirror reflecting every doubt, every fear, and every sense of isolation he had worked so hard to mask. The pulpit, the sermons, the public recognition, all of it could not fill the emptiness that weighed on him at those moments. These struggles were compounded by the expectations placed on him by others. People looked to Jamal for guidance, inspiration, and answers to their spiritual questions. They leaned on him during crises, celebrated his victories, and trusted him as a moral compass. But while he poured so much into others, he often felt he had nowhere to turn for himself. The role of a leader had a cost, and for Jamal, that cost was the quiet, persistent weight